let's do a quick recap so that we can move forward. And we have our beautiful board here that our site director drew. Notice we have a tree. What does the tree represent?
The garden.
Garden, correct. We have the clouds with an arrow coming down. This is Genesis chapter 6. What did that represent?
The angels coming down.
Yeah.
Be with the wood.
Yep. So we're going to call them. We want to use probably as technical terms as we can, because actually, angels, it turns out, is a job title. They're not. It means a messenger. So they're the sons of God. The sons of God came down and married the daughters of men. And what was the offspring? The Nephilim, the giants, the men of renown, the Nephilim. And then we have the Tower of Babel. So all three of these we talked about. It spanned, according to the biblical testimony, a period of almost 2,000 years. And guys, we have multiple rebellions going on here. We have God creating everything good. Everything good. And just to say, like, how did he define good? He defined good as a human ruling as king and priest over the earth with no curse. Like, that's what God said. This is good. This is good. We also talked about how there's going to be a restoration at the day of the Lord of what God said was good. Right? And we defined, like, this is the beginning. That's what it looked like. That's what the end is going to be like. That's our hope and expectation. But there were bunches of rebellions that took place. And basically these rebellions, we'll get into it more in the course, but these were basically actions of self-reliance. We're gonna do this on our own terms. We don't need the King of Kings who actually knows how to do everything and set this whole thing up. We're gonna take wisdom for ourselves. Or we're gonna seek after these other divine beings, the other gods, and take knowledge for ourselves. And then Tower of Babel is a whole nother animal, very similar, that we'll get into in the course. You guys will, I think, like some of the, or find interesting some of the things we find there. But we have these three rebellions, and we said that if you asked maybe a first century Jew, what's wrong with the world? They wouldn't just point to the garden. They would point to the garden and the rebellion there. But they would talk about, like we said, the rebellion in the garden brought in sin, brought in brokenness. It introduced a curse. God placed a curse on the earth because of that. But then we have a rebellion in the heavens. The sons of God, these other divine beings, they're just like totally against us. And then at the Tower of Babel is another problem. I'm saving that one for our discussion because it's so unique. But we have these three issues, and what was the thing that God was going to do to fix all of it? He said something back in Genesis 3:15 that was like the seed of promise that was put into the hearts of the human race. Does anyone remember off the top of their heads? If we don't, we can go look at it. What did God promise in Genesis 3:15? I said it was the first gospel.
That the offspring of man and woman is going to crush the skull of the serpent.
Good.
Yeah.
The seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. This is probably, as we move forward, the most important aspect of what we pick up in the beginning, because this becomes the foundation by which we can really understand the rest of the biblical story. So, the seed of the woman. Let's just, everybody say, the seed of the woman.
The seed of the woman.
So the seed of the woman, we'll find out, becomes the seed of other people. So the descendants of other people. And that's what we're going to pick up today. I left you with a cliffhanger last week. God dispersed the nations. We have the beginning of the families of the earth at Tower of Babel. He changes the languages of the people. We know that. And then we have the beginning of nations, the families of the earth. But what God does is he says, 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out. I am done with you. I am disinheriting the nations. And then it's like, well, what about the story? What about restoration? What about the seed of the woman? Like, you got to have somebody who's your person, God, or else the seed of the woman doesn't come to fix this whole thing. Who does God call out next? Anybody remember? Abram. So Abram is in a land called, he's in the Ur of the Chaldees. He's an idol-worshiping Gentile that God says, come here. And we actually know that he and his family from, I think we pick it up in Joshua. is where it says it. But it makes it very clear. Abram was following other gods. That's what he was doing. He was serving the gods of the nations, and God calls him and says, leave your family, leave your land, which in the ancient world was huge. It's not just like us who are upwardly mobile and we just like, yeah, I'm just going to travel. That was a big deal, to leave your family and your land. So he had to move out on faith, and he comes into the land of Canaan. I wish I had a map, but basically it's generally would be the area on the other side of the Jordan River, if you're familiar with the Middle East at all, but in the general area that is modern day land of Israel, Palestine type stuff. So Abram comes here, he takes on a new God, the God of, it's the God of Abraham at that point, but becomes the God of Israel later on. We'll call him Yahweh, because that's his name. That's probably how you would pronounce that name, but it's the Hebrew would be Yahweh. So he calls out Abraham, and what God does, we're going to look at it in just a minute, is God makes promises with Abraham. And if you look up on our board, we have in beautiful, gorgeous letters the word covenants. Covenants, and it's plural because God makes multiple covenants. But the first covenant that he makes is right here, and this is pretty much the foundation for the rest of the Bible. Now, when I get to the covenants part, because I'll go through the 7 C's, it's like creation, curse, covenants, people check out, and it's because it's like, well, that's really boring. But what you have to understand, guys, is our entire Bible is based on what we're going to talk about right now, the covenants with God. I mean, the covenants that God has with the human race. So the first covenant we're going to talk about, it's an everlasting covenant. Everlasting covenant. Not like a for a little while covenant, an everlasting covenant that God has with this man, Abraham. Abram is his name in the beginning, but it gets changed. But let's go to Genesis chapter 12. We're just going to read the first time that God makes a covenant with Abram. If you go from 12 through, oh my gosh, is it like 23 or 25? You see this covenant reiterated in slightly different ways throughout, but I think Genesis chapter 12 sets it up well. Genesis 12, 1 through 3. Somebody read that for us.
Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
Excellent. What I did in my Bible, and you might want to do this too, is I just went through and underlined each of the different promises that God makes in this. So I'm just going to read kind of through them. If we took all of the places that God promised things to Abraham over the next few chapters, it would be a little bit longer list. This one, I think, for our purposes today, does a good job. So the first one, I will make a great nation. So Abram, I'm going to make a great nation. I'll make a great nation. Actually, before we even move forward, does anybody, just so we understand how the Bible fits together, do you know what nation, I kind of already said it, but what nation Abraham and his descendants become?
Israelites.
Yes, Israel. Correct. All right, so I will make a great nation, and I will bless you. All right? We might should talk about that. When was the first time that God blessed somebody? That he actually says, be blessed. It's a little bit of a tricky one, but you go all the way back to the beginning. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. Blessing for Abraham, who is not very many generations, not very many people removed from Adam, he might have heard the word blessing in a different way or understood the concept of blessing in a different way. When he heard the word, I will bless you, what he probably had in mind was a return back to this garden reality. Like, I'm going to bless you, Abraham. I am going to allow you to partake back in the original Edenic blessing. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not the only one that would say that. But by saying, I bless you, we just think, oh, that's sweet. But Abraham probably heard it in a little bit of more distinct and weightier terms. But we'll keep moving. And I will make your name great. So Abraham, there's probably more to it than that, but Abraham's name is pretty great. Everybody knows it. And so you will be a blessing. I'll hold off on that because the last one says something kind of similar. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. So the one that curses Abraham, and by extension his seed, receives a curse from God. That's heavy. But this last one, I think, is the most important or one of the most important for moving the story forward. Look with me, the very last line in verse 3. In you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. In you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Remember how we defined blessing? It was this return back to the garden state. Now, Genesis chapter 11, we had the nations of the earth. That's when they're created, right? All these nations. And it's like, I don't know how many hundred years later. I want to say it's 400 years later that Abraham comes about, but it might not be that long. I can't remember. But the nations of the earth have begun to spread abroad, and then God calls Abram, and Abram's not a nation yet. He's just a dude. But God said, I'm going to turn you into a nation. And in you, I'm going to actually bless all these other nations that I have disinherited. In other words, my plan of restoring the garden reality, of bringing the seed of the woman, of fixing everything, I'm not done yet. It might have looked like it for a while. But in fact, Abraham, I'm calling you, and now I'm going to bless all these nations that have been just so rebellious. I'm going to actually bless them, but I'm going to do it through you. We're going to continue this story, Abram, through you. That's the implications here. Now, if we pick up in other places with Abram, his name turns to Abraham. I'll just start calling him Abraham. If we pick it up in other places, we see that God also promised to him and to his descendants the land of Canaan, and it defines the borders. They're very large. He promises to Abraham and to his descendants the land, all the land of Canaan. It's modern day Israel is in the land of what would be the land of Canaan back then, but modern day Israel is not the size that God promised to Abraham. Never has been, actually. So he promises them the land as an everlasting covenant. Okay? That's significant because we said that this covenant is everlasting, right? And if it's everlasting, then the everlasting covenant, like we would think that God would be serious about that. Well, a lot of people don't think that he's serious about that, and there's been a lot of Christian reinterpretations. I won't go any further on that, but I just take very seriously that God made an everlasting covenant with Abraham and to his descendants. Okay? Now, what God promised in another place, I actually should have probably turned to that one. But he also promised in Abraham, I think it's in chapter 15, he promised that kings would come from Abraham. So he said, Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation, great people, I'm going to give you the land, I'm going to bless all the nations through you, and also there's going to be kings who come out of you. Right? So if you have a nation and you have a return back to what God called good, you have then a king on the earth ruling and a seed coming. Well, if it's going to be through Abraham and it's going to be through his people, then we also can get a little bit ahead of the story. Sorry, jumping a little bit. But we can get a little bit ahead on the story and know, okay, well, where is this seed of the woman going to come back to and rule from? Where's he coming? Well, could it possibly be the land that was promised to Abraham? That is now the modern day land of Israel. So there's going to be a seed of the woman coming to the earth, and he's apparently, we'll find out again, he's going to rule on the earth just like Adam did. He's going to crush the head of the serpent. But where's he going to rule from? Is it just like New York or something? Or just generally everywhere somehow? Well, it turns out that the next covenant that we get into is, actually it's 2 covenants down. I'll go to that one. next, and then we'll back up. The next covenant that we'll get to in just a moment is the covenant with David. It's called the Davidic covenant. And the covenant with David is a promise to David, hey, I'm going to put someone on your throne forever, David. I'll put someone on your throne forever. He's going to rule over what will be the nation of Israel forever. And he will rule over all of the nations of the earth from your throne. So what we see is this seed of the woman. I'll open it up for questions just in case I wasn't clear on this one. But the seed of the woman who comes back to crush the head of the serpent. He's in Israel. He's in the land promised to Abraham. And he's on a throne. It's the throne of David. So what this means is when Jesus comes back, unless God changed his covenants, then Jesus is going to come back to the land promised to Abraham. He's going to sit on a very political throne called the throne of David. That throne is not in existence right now. Some say it got spiritualized and it's in heaven. That's bogus. Okay? The throne of David will have to be reestablished over Israel in the future. But I skipped ahead a little bit. If we go from the Abrahamic covenant, let's just continue our story. Sorry again, guys. I'm shooting from the hip, so I feel a little bit disjointed here. But if we continue the story, we got the promise to Abraham. Abraham, I'm going to do all these things. So what does Abraham do? Well, Abraham, he doesn't have any children, right? So that's a problem. How are you going to have all these descendants if you don't have any children in these nations? What happens? Somebody tell me the story. How does he get a child?
He gets with Hagar first.
Okay.
And
He's like, let's do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Let's try. And that's actually a culturally acceptable thing in his day, to take a handmaiden. We wouldn't say that's okay. I don't think God would either. But it was acceptable in their day, so they tried it. And they had Ishmael. Yep. But that wasn't the seed of promise. So Abraham's got to have a child, or else, like, how can you be a great nation? But it's not Ishmael, which God blessed him with Isaac. Correct. Good job, guys. So it turns out that God works a miracle. And Abram, who is very old, and his wife, who's very old, Sarah, they have a child in their old age, and it's Isaac. Now Isaac, anybody know who his wife ends up being?
Is it Rebecca?
Rebecca. Good job. So Rebecca, also miraculously, they have a child. Actually, have two. Who is their children?
Jacob and Esau.
Jacob and Esau, correct. So you have Abraham, Isaac. Now who's the chosen one between Jacob and Esau?
Jacob.
Jacob, correct. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Who do the promises get passed down to? You can go and read them. The same covenant promise that was made to Abraham, a land, a nation, blessing, all the nations will be blessed in you. They are reiterated to Isaac, then to Jacob. Now, Jacob has 12 sons. And first Jacob's name is changed to Israel, and then Jacob has 12 sons. These become roughly the 12 tribes of Israel. 12 tribes of Israel. This is where we get that 12 tribes concept, because Jacob, Israel, has 12 sons. Sort of. That's kind of how it works. It's a little more complicated than that. But then what happens? So Abraham becomes a family. What happens to that family? Where do they go? You guys got this?
Thinking Joseph in Egypt right now. Is what I'm thinking.
Okay, you said Egypt. Good. The family, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they become a family. The family, because of a famine, and this is like the coat of many colors guy, Joseph, they go into Egypt. And in Egypt, they turn from a family to a nation. They become very populous. So Abraham becomes a family, the family becomes a nation, and they're in slavery for what? How long? Like quizzing y'all on this. 400 years, yep. And at the end of that 400 years, a new Pharaoh arises who doesn't remember all that Joseph and the coat of many colors guy, he like saved the world, basically. The last Pharaoh doesn't remember all that Joseph did for the nation. And so he puts the people of Israel under slavery, right? Because he's nervous. Like, there's so many people here. What are we going to do? So we got to put them in bondage. Then what does God do? Who does he raise up? Moses. Okay. Moses is the deliverer. Anybody seen the Prince of Egypt movie?
That's a great movie.
Yeah, rocking. Okay, got a few
Can we
people.
watch that for Bible class?
Yeah, we can watch that for Bible. That's next week. We're going to watch Prince of Egypt, the cartoon, and we'll memorize the songs. But he raises up a deliverer. So this guy comes, he delivers the people out of Egypt, and then a significant thing happens. To have a nation, what do you have to have? You have to have people, right? You have to have land, which we've got that. We've got the land of Egypt. I mean, land of Israel, not the land of Egypt. Don't go back to the land of Egypt, guys. It's not what they're supposed to do. We have a people. We have a land. We know one day we're going to have a king, though we haven't gotten there yet. But what else do you have to have a great nation?
Law.
You have to have a law. Good job, man. You have to have a law. So God calls, he calls them, well, one, he delivers them, does like great signs and wonders to show that the Egyptian gods are nothing, and he is like awesome. By the way, the Egyptian gods, they were really doing stuff because like they're real living beings, like they're the spirit beings that were rebellious that we talked about. All right, so they're real. Like there's call them demons, call them what you want, but they're real things. But God like face planted them and showed them who's boss. So God delivers them, shows off a bunch, says, I'm got big muscle, you guys don't. But then they're out at the foot of, anybody know what mountain they're at?
Sinai.
Sinai. Gosh, y'all rocking. So they're at the foot of the mountain, Mount Sinai, and God calls Moses up on the mountain. And God begins giving the law, the instruction. Now, we just need to change a paradigm real quick. We're going to kill a sacred cow. When you hear the word law or Torah or whatever you want, but when you hear the word law, I don't want you to think like, oh, bad, legalistic. Okay, these are the instructions of God. These are God, Torah, first 5 books, or the law of Moses. Torah literally means instruction. This is God graciously giving a way of life to the people so that they know how to orient their lives in a life-giving way. Okay? Now, a lot of the stuff is very cultural, and we'd be like, that's really weird, but it's because they're in a completely different culture, completely different time, completely different place, okay? So, you gotta just give them some grace, because they would think we're really weird with our iPhones and stuff, and what is that little thing they're doing? Yeah, so we gotta give them some grace, but we think it's weird. But a lot of it's really practical, like how do you deal with somebody who has leprosy, or how do you deal with somebody who gets sick, or what if we touch a dead body? Like, God does very practical things to keep disease and all kinds of just really genius things. But also, one of the primary things that God says is to take care of the poor and the foreigner in your midst and the widow and the orphan. All of these concepts, like oppression and lack of justice in a society is like one of the worst things in God's list. Like later the prophets rebuke Israel for doing bad things, and it's like almost always you are oppressing the poor, you are not taking care of the widow and the orphan. These are the things that God hates. Now, this covenant is slightly different than the Abrahamic covenant. Abrahamic covenant, I'm going to use a big word, but it's called a unilateral covenant. And all a unilateral covenant is you have a big dude on top saying to the little dude on bottom, I'm going to make these promises to you and I'm going to do them. Like, you have to do a little obedience, like leave your land and stuff like that. But I'm going to do this whether, like, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to agree, whatever, sort of, but that's a unilateral covenant. It's the big dude saying, I'm going to do this for you. But then we get to the covenant with Moses, and this is called a bilateral covenant. Basically, the nation of Israel and Yahweh both have terms that they have to agree to. So Yahweh says, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to be your God. I'm going to bless you in all of these ways. but you have to also walk in my law. You have to do these things. Okay? Does that make sense? There is agreement on both sides. In a covenant, though, this is so crucial. There is also blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. So it would be the blessings of the covenant, the curses of the covenant. You can go read those laid out in Deuteronomy 28. I think that's the right place. Deuteronomy 28. You can read the blessings and the curses. One of the chief end of the curses, if they were to walk in disobedience, was removal from the promised land. So, Abraham, I'm going to give your descendants this land, but descendants of Abraham, if you're going to stay in this land, which is really God's land, if you're going to stay in this land, you have to walk in my ways. Otherwise, I'm going to remove you from the land, and other nations are going to come and take you captive. That was like the top, the peak of the disobedience. Well, what happens? They're in the land. Well, they take a little while, and then they get into the land of Israel, land of Canaan, and they conquer it. They subdue it. God says, wipe the peoples out. We'll look at why that is a bit more, but we talked about it last week. The Nephilim are actually back in the land, so that's a problem. We have those guys running around, but they're also just really wicked nations. Okay, so they are told, take over the land, do the conquest. So they take over the land that is the land of Israel. They don't get all of it, like everything that God promised. They never quite get there, but they take it over. And then what do they want? They want a king. Well, God seems to say, he says some stuff that makes it look like, it's probably not a good idea that you guys have a king, but it actually turns out that he told Abraham that there was going to be kings, so God kind of knew the whole time. But he was waiting for the right king. He was waiting for the right king. Who was the king that God had in mind? Who was the one?
David?
King David. The man after God's own heart. King David. So now we've got a nation. We've got a law, we've got people, we've got land, and now we have a king. You just got everything you need, right? So then God, he really loves David. He really loved David. And he, like I said a minute ago, he promises to David, I am going to establish your throne forever. This is one of those unilateral covenants. The big dude is doing it for the little dude. I'm going to establish your throne forever. And your sons will sit on this throne forever, ruling over all of the house of Israel. And nation of Israel, it's still through you that I'm going to fix this creation. It's still through you that I'm going to bless all the families of the earth. So we have the land, the place, we have a throne, right? We're doing great. This plan is moving along. The plan of Genesis 3:15 and God's story, it's hyperdrive. It's looking great. But what happens? What becomes the problem? They're not walking in God's ways. The people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, if they're going to stay in the land, if they're going to be the people that God uses to restore this thing, they have to walk in God's ways. Otherwise, you just have sinful and rebellious people that God chooses to use. That's a problem. In fact, it's a place in, I want to say it's Deuteronomy, but I can't remember off the top of my head. God said to Israel, the peoples of the earth are supposed to look at you and the way you're following my law and say, wow, this nation has an incredible God with an incredibly wise law. The nations of the earth were supposed to say that to Israel because of the way they were walking in God's law. Because the Torah is genius. It's genius. And the nations were supposed to see it and say, we need to become like them. But instead, Israel becomes like the nations. They walk away from God's ways. Well, what happened in the curses of the covenant when the people of Israel didn't walk in God's ways? What was the end result? I mentioned a minute ago.
They lose their land.
They get removed from their land. Now, you can watch the Kings, and if you read through the Chronicles or Kings, you see this king good, this king bad, this king bad, this king bad, this king really bad. Hey, that one's kind of okay. This king bad. It's just this progression of just sinfulness and idolatry and going after other gods and making idols for yourself and serving the gods of the nations. Just not taking care of the poor and the marginalized and the foreigner. Those were the things that God loved. And what would happen, here is the secret to the rest of your Bible. All the prophets are just stories of these prophets that God would raise up, come to Israel and say, repent, follow God's law. Why aren't you following His ways? It's them coming and giving oracles of saying, repent, or there's going to be judgment. And then after the judgment comes, which we'll talk about, the prophets also promise restoration. Okay, so that's like, you're reading the prophets and you're like, why is he like getting on to everybody so much? And talking about all this crazy stuff. It's because these are rebukes to a sinful nation. The nation that is God's nation, that is supposed to be used to restore the Garden of Eden. That's what the prophets are. So Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel's a little different, but similar. So we have these lines of kings and the wickedness and the wickedness and the wickedness. God is very patient. Very patient. But eventually something happens. I won't quiz you on this one. Some of you would know it. But God then raises up one of the nations of the earth, because He promised, I will send nations. He actually said in Deuteronomy 28, before they went into the, Deuteronomy 32, before they went into the land, He said, you are going to follow other gods, and I am going to discipline you. Because He said it before it even happened. So He rose up another nation. And the first people that God rose up to, I forgot to say, the nation of Israel split into two different nations. So you had the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom, which is Judah. But the first people that God rose up to discipline Israel were the Assyrians. Everybody say Assyrians.
Assyrians.
Okay. So the curse of the covenant is they're about to do it. God's about to do it. So the Assyrians come and they actually take into captivity the northern kingdom of Israel. And you're like, man, this story is looking tough. Israel has been removed from their land. How are we going to get back to the garden? Oh, but wait. Judah, the southern kingdom, they're still there. And Jerusalem is there. The throne of David is actually in Jerusalem. So we're still doing okay. We're still doing okay. We still got the throne of David. We still got the land. We're okay. And then Judah is really wicked. And the southern kingdom is really wicked. And God sends prophets to them and says, hey, guys, you got to straighten up. God's raising up the Babylonians. He's about to discipline you. What happens? 586 BC, Babylon, with this dude called Nebuchadnezzar. Have you ever heard of Nebuchadnezzar? He comes and removes Judah from the land. And now, Israel, Judah, they're out of the land. They're scattered. They're in captivity. There's nobody. Where is the seed of the woman? What's going to happen? This is the question. They're in captivity. Anybody know how long they were? And the northern kingdom, there were 10 tribes there. They pretty much, they disappear from the history books. We don't really know what happens. Some people think they know. They don't. We don't know what happened to the 10 tribes. The southern kingdom, Judah, they're taken into captivity. This is where the book of Daniel picks up. Daniel and his buddies. Anybody know Daniel's buddies?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Good job. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I don't remember their Jewish names. They're taken in the first wave of Nebuchadnezzar into Babylon. This is where Daniel picks up. How long are they in Babylon? Does anyone remember or know? They're in Babylon for 70 years. 70 years. And then they're allowed to go back to the land. I should have had us draw the city of Babylon, but it's interesting. It gets risen up in where Babel was. But we've got all of our covenants down. People are in captivity. And then Daniel, in Daniel chapter 9, the prophet Jeremiah had said, you're going to be in captivity for 70 years. And so Daniel actually goes and reads the book of Jeremiah. And he says, it's been 70 years, Lord. And in Daniel chapter 9, did I say all that right? Yeah. In Daniel chapter 9, Daniel starts praying and saying, God, it's been 70 years. It's time for us to leave captivity and go back to the land. We've got to get back to our land, God. Well, the angel Gabriel comes along, says a few things about eschatology that I won't get into, and he gives them a timeline of the rest of history up into the Messiah and afterwards, which is really cool. But he comes and reassures them. But 70 years is up, God promised, and sure enough, the who is it? Do you remember?
Persians, right?
Persians, thank you. And it is, what's the king?
Cyrus?
Cyrus, thank you. Glad you were back there. King Cyrus, is the one that allows Israel to go back to their land. So Babylon had been taken over by the Medo-Persians, and they're allowed to go back to their land. But, this is the big but. This is so crucial, I wish I had said it prior to now. When they were in captivity, God sent prophets to them, and I guess Ezekiel, and also Isaiah prophesied about it, even though he wasn't there or alive. So there's some interesting things there. But